proof one needs for conviction? Before I begin, I want everybody to understand that whether you are a litigator or a prosecuting attorney, it does not matter. A case of circumstantial evidence is very complicated and relatively tough. The reason being that there is no direct evidence, and there is a huge risk that is out there that you might end up convicting the wrong person or may convict the person on weak grounds of evidence, which will end up being overturned in a higher court. So these are some of the complications that come along in a case that is based on circumstantial evidence. Now, I will be discussing some of these grounds on which a circumstantial conviction can be based. Now, you need to understand that a case on circumstantial evidence is based on two parameters, which are the last seen theory and the motive for the crime. Anybody who is being convicted of the same, there are two things that the prosecution needs to prove without doubt before they can determine that okay, that this person is guilty of the offense that is being spoken about. One is the last seen theory, where you are talking about that okay, this person was the last person to be seen alive with the deceased. And second is the motive. However, as a matter of judicial precedent, motive generally is not given as much importance as it should be, and there has not been a case till date where the mere fact that the prosecution could not prove the motive and the accused was allowed to go scot free. So I think it is the circumstances of that particular case, and particularly the theory of proving the same, that the accused in question was last seen with the deceased, that matters a lot. Now there are three landmark judgments on the basis of which uh, we have come out with a proposition for circumstantial evidence. Those three landmark judgments are Hanumant versus State of MP 1953, Sharad Birdichand Sarda versus State of Maharashtra 1985, and recently in Shanti Devi versus State of Rajasthan 2012. Now, these are the three things on which this whole idea has been given. Now, what are those circumstances in which a conviction can be given in a case of circumstantial evidence? Number one, the circumstances of conclusion of guilt of the accused has to be fully established. For example, if the prosecution is contending that the accused person was somebody who was in a desperate circumstance for money and was needing those three that money and had to kill the accused, then in that situation, this particular circumstance has to be fully established by the prosecution. I understand that the judgments are being asked. Just a second, I'll just share them with all of you. Just give me a second. I have sent across the judgments, and most of the participants will be able to see them. In any case, I will be sending across the judgments at the end of the lecture through Ashwini, so you will be sure to get them. No worries about that. Now, the next circumstance that has to be proved is the facts that have are being contended by the prosecution say that the accused was present at the scene of crime at the relevant time have to be fully established. It cannot be a situation where the prosecution contends that this prosecution is contending that there was this particular person present at the scene of crime, or for that matter the door was closed, or some fact that is out there which is relevant for conviction in this particular case, which ends up being proved wrong. That cannot be a situation where an accused can be convicted. So the facts concerning the same have to be fully established in this in a case of in a case of circumstantial evidence. Now, the next factor that has to be established is that every other hypothesis or every other circumstance that is out there which might end up going in favor of the accused has to be fully disintegrated. So there cannot be a situation where a particular theory might be given. For example, on one hand, we are saying that the accused was a very poor person, and this was the reason why the motivation for the crime is there. And the next day, we come to know that the person was sure to get some money or had some money invested on the side which this person could have accessed. So this hypothesis cannot come out over there. It has to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt, and this particular hypothesis has to be cleared out before conviction can be given. So this is the third thing. Circumstances regarding this particular incident have to be of conclusive nature. The next thing is that, as I said, it has to be proved beyond reasonable doubt and more than reasonable doubt. So every other possibility that could be there has to be eliminated before we could even begin thinking for convicting. So there cannot be any other reason for this crime to happen. As I said, the motive has to be completely established, though it is not a deal breaker. It does help a long way. And finally, the complete chain of evidence has to be there before we can establish that the accused is guilty of the offense. Now, let me give an example what I mean by that. Now, for example, an accused is being prosecuted on the basis of the fact that this person was the last person to be seen with the deceased at 10 o'clock in the night, and after 10 o'clock the next morning this person was found to be dead. Now, by the last seen theory, it seems obvious that this person can be convicted of murder. However, if it is subsequently revealed that between 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock at night, the light in that particular house was on and there was some commotion going on, which means there is a possibility that there were some other people after the accused in question is being prosecuted, then it raises a doubt on the prosecution story. And in that circumstance, then a conviction cannot be given because the story of the prosecution will end up being doubtful. So the facts that are being alleged have to be completely proved. Before I move further, I will reiterate the five motives or five factors that have to be established in a case of circumstantial evidence. First, circumstances regarding the guilt of the accused have to be established. Second, facts which are related to that particular offense have to be consistent with the guilt of the accused. Third, circumstances which we are talking about, which talk about the guilt of the accused, have to be of conclusive nature. We cannot be doubtful about them. Fourth, every other possibility that could lead to the innocence of the accused has to be eliminated. And finally, the complete chain of evidence has to be fully established. As I said, there cannot be a scope of doubt as far as the innocence of the accused is concerned. We cannot be convicting an innocent person. Though that does sound logical, but there have been times where people end up convicting wrong persons. Now, please understand that the five principles that I have mentioned are generally cases where the body of the deceased in question was not found. There are certain other principles that also are relevant when a case of circumstantial evidence is being talked about. So, for example, say suspicion cannot be used in absence of proof of the accused person's guilt. For example, now this is a standard story that we often see, that an elderly couple ends up being murdered, and the first person that we all suspect is the poor servant who was tending to them. Now we do have this tendency to presume that if somebody is in poor and tough circumstances, will have a very high incentive to engage in this kind of criminal activity. Now, I do understand the point where the suspicion will be there, but as I said, just because we have suspicion on this person cannot subsist the need for proof. As I have said in the final condition, that factor that I mentioned for circumstantial evidence, fact evidence and factors which are being talked about have to be proved beyond reasonable doubt. So those things are extremely important. Just because we have grave suspicion, and I'm talking about the language used by the courts, even grave suspicion is not sufficient to convict somebody unless and until the five factors that I've talked about have been fully established. So that is one another principle other than the five that I talked about, which is relevant. Another factor is that burden of proof in a case of circumstantial evidence is on the party that is asserting the same, which means that if the prosecution is contending that okay, the accused was the last person to be seen with the deceased, then not only they have to prove that, but they have to prove any other circumstance or fact that they are contending before the court. Please understand that in any criminal case, without doubt, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. But in a case of circumstantial evidence, even any inference which is suggested to amount to guilt of the accused is avoided by the courts. So they want to be 100% sure, and any argument, or for that matter, anything contended by the prosecution has to be conclusively proved beyond a reasonable doubt before the court can accept it. So that is one more thing. The burden is always on the prosecution, and it is to a large extent. Third and final thing is that if by chance an accused person is brought before the court and they seem to lie, or they have lied on the stand on an incriminating piece of evidence. Now let me give you an example what I mean by this. Let us say a person or a husband is being convicted for dowry death of his wife, and when he is asked that okay, where were you between the time period when the crime was being taken place, and the husband lies that okay, I was not at the scene of crime, I was somewhere away, and the prosecution is able to establish that the accused person was at the scene of crime, or even if he wasn't, he is lying about the same, then this lie that this person has said will become a part of incriminating evidence against the accused. And this was specifically discussed in a case which I will be sending, and that case is Trimukh Maroti Kirkam versus State of Maharashtra. In this case, as I've given you an example, this is exactly what happened. It was a case of dowry death. The husband was the accused person, and when he was asked, where were you at the scene of crime, he lied about it. And this ended up also adding to the incriminating evidence against the accused. However, there is one thing that I would like to share with our participants today. Mere fact that you have lied over something can be incriminating evidence, but will not be sufficient to convict you. Again, because there is a legal maxim, false in uno, false in omnibus, which means false in one thing, false in everything. This legal maxim, which has been taken from the English legal system, is not applicable in India. So, unfortunately, we have a very, very high threshold, and there are times where even after lying on the stand, you can get away with it. So, that is one of the problems that we have when we talk about conviction in a case of circumstantial evidence. That is another issue that is there. So if you lie, it will go against you, it will be taken against you, but that single factor cannot be taken as a source of conviction for the accused. Also, let us say there is a case where a robbery or dacoity has taken place, and later the accused is not caught, but the gold or the jewelry that was stolen from that particular person is recovered from you. So that can be used as a ground for starting a trial against you, but that cannot be the mere ground for convicting you as a person. Please understand that mere recovery of stolen goods from an accused person is not absolute proof of that person's guilt for the crime. However, in cases of kidnapping, and I want to be very specific about the crime here, in cases of kidnapping only, if the person in question, if the victim is later found dead after it has been conclusively established that you were the one who has kidnapped it, then it is presumed that you were the killer as well. And this is specifically done in cases of kidnapping, because this is directly in line with what is known as the last seen theory. As I have said, if you were the last person to be seen alive with the deceased was seen as alive, say you had a nice dinner with the deceased, you had a party, you had some drinks, after which you left your friend the deceased at their home, and you were the last person seen alive with them. The next morning they are found to be dead. So the first round of suspicion will definitely be on you. But if you can prove that there were certain commotion going on in the house, some arguments or something, at 12 o'clock in the night, which is the period after which you had left, then definitely that will go in favor of the accused and will help in exoneration. But you need to understand that this burden of proving, again, as I said, the burden of proving a fact that you're asserting is on the party that is asserting the same. So it is not easy, it is really tough. And as I mentioned at the start of this entire webinar, that in cases of circumstantial evidence, there are many complications that are involved. So, this is one factor which is really difficult to prove, and it needs a great amount of evidence on its part to stand in court. Also, there is another factor that I would want our listeners to understand today is the factor of witnesses in this particular case. Now, in the situation where the last seen theory is alleged and there is a witness who contends that okay, I remember seeing this person as the last person who was with the deceased when the deceased was alive. If the witness in this particular case is somehow related to the deceased in question, then you can definitely contend that a related witness has a very high incentive to lie in favor of the deceased and the prosecution. However, there are certain factors which determine whether, in what circumstance, a related witness will be taken as a biased witness. Mere fact that the witness is related to the deceased is not sufficient to disregard or discredit their testimony. You have to conclusively talk about the circumstances and the logic as to why this related witness will end up testifying in favor of the prosecution without having any basis in reality. So, those factors have to be established to a large extent. So these are some of the principles that are necessary when a conviction is given in the case of circumstantial evidence. And as I have mentioned, the burden of proof of contending the same is on the party that is asserting it. Now, before we move further, I would think it would be an appropriate time to take questions from our audience so that we have more clarity on this concept and they are not just hearing it. Ashwini, are there any questions?
Nothing that I can see here. You guys can drop a comment, drop your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself, and share whatever question that you might have. I don't think there are any questions coming at this point of time.
Sure, I understand. I would need to send in judgments first. What I'm going to do is that I'll send you all the judgments that are out there, all right? And then you can share it with the audience if I may. All right, Ashwini? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, got it.
All right. That would be all. Thank you so much for having me, and it was a real
Um,
pleasure interacting with them.
Sid,
I suppose we do have a question from the audience. Just hold
right.
on. From Sadgun Bhate. Sadgun, as I have mentioned, evidences are generally enough, provided they can be used as conclusively to establish the guilt of the accused. Just because there is an evidence in favor of the prosecution does not mean that you can send somebody to jail or convict that person. Those circumstances and that evidence has to be conclusively established. For example, if you are saying that a particular person had a knife in their hand with blood on it, and that blood is later tested in DNA for not being of any human source, then that is going to really dent the story of the prosecution. So that is going to be really tough when you are contending in a court of law that, okay, I am holding this person guilty, but the particular situation that I'm talking about, or the evidence that I'm talking about, is not reliable. So a person can be used in circumstantial evidence to be proven guilty. However, there are cases where even with all the evidence, the court has not held guilty. And I think I need to discuss this particular case, which is something everybody would find really interesting. So I'm not sure if all of you have heard the case of Agnu Nagesia versus State of Bihar. So this is generally a case of confession evidence and section 27 of the Indian Evidence Act, but I think it is very relevant from the circumstantial evidence perspective. So, Sadgun, in this case, a disgruntled man was staying with his joint family. Okay, he was staying with his brother-in-law's wife, two of their children, and his mother. Now he was not happy with his mother because his mother had written every property which was belonging to them in their will to his other brother because he was having children and a family. He was not happy with that and he was feeling disgruntled by the same. So, what happens is that after some days of this harboring this animosity, one day when his brother goes outside to feed the goats and other animals that they had, he takes a gandasa and kills him in the jungle where he is feeding these goats and buries the body there. Then he comes back home, kills his mother, kills his sister-in-law and the two children, and bury them in the house itself. After doing this, he feels guilty, walks into a police station, and confesses the crime. Using his confession, the police officers take him to the places where the bodies have been buried and recover the same. Now, when this person comes in court, Arjun Nagesia, and obviously he meets a lawyer, he contends that this confession was given under duress and he is not guilty of anything. Now, the court has to determine whether the confession of this person and the circumstances in which this person was living are sufficient to convict the accused. The court held that the parts of confession which led to recovery of the bodies is relevant, but since there was no eyewitness to these murders and there is nobody who can even contend the circumstances in which these have taken place, the accused cannot be convicted. So, can you imagine that an accused openly said that I have done it, helped the police in getting all the recover all the bodies as well as the weapon of offense, And still, just based on the fact that there was no eyewitness and there was nobody to even prove the circumstances in which this crime may have taken place, the accused was let go scot free after committing 5 murders. So this is why I said at the beginning of this webinar that uh, that there is no certainty in a case of circumstantial evidence, because there is way too many, I would say, factors which are not exactly in favor of the accused or of the prosecution. It is highly biased. It is there. I'm getting Muskan. I'm not sure of the advocate in this case, but I'll be sure to share the PDF with Ashwini so he can send it along. Abhishek, I do agree with you on the judge that it is dependent on the judge, but the point is that please understand that this decision was taken in a different era. This is a judgment from 1960s. This was a time where morality and integrity of person was very relied upon. We did not generally believe that somebody would have lied. Now, let me give you an example for this. Generally, confession given on deathbed or any testimony made on dying declaration is held to be sufficient evidence. However, there have been cases where the deceased have lied just before they have died. So there have been certain courts which have contended that dying declaration can be relied fully, but there can be cases where we will doubt the veracity of the testimony that is given. So please understand the socio-economic circumstances in which this decision was given. We trusted people much more in 1960s and 70s than we do now. So that is a different issue that I'm talking about. Now, the need, now Muskan, the question, when does the need for circumstantial evidence arise? It arises in a case where there is no direct evidence. For example, there is no eyewitness to the murder, there is no recovery of the weapon of offense, or there is no recovery of the deceased person's body. So, these issues are places where circumstantial evidence has to be taken into account. An example of this will be the Dhananjay Chatterjee murder case. In this case, Dhananjay Chatterjee was a watchman who was guarding this society in Calcutta, and where he was alleged to have murdered a 16-year-old girl after rape. So, in this case, there was no eyewitness, but the fact that the girl had complained to her mother many times before that this person, Dhananjay, has been troubling, and the fact that on the day of the murder, right before the mother found the Hetal Parekh, which is deceased in question, died on the lying on the floor with a pool of blood, Dhananjay Chatterjee was alleged by certain people to have left the building literally minutes before this mother came and saw Hetal in that condition. So these are some of the circumstances in which circumstantial evidence has to be relied. However, I think it is my duty to inform you that there has been a lot of thought process and arguments in favor of Dhananjay over the years. So it is a bit of a stretch to determine that whether he was actually guilty or not. And generally, as a rule of prudence and caution, it is not advised by the judiciary to give a death penalty to anybody who is being convicted on circumstantial evidence. So that is something that has to be taken as a word of caution. But as I said, it depends on the circumstance of the case. Dhananjay Chatterjee's case received a lot of media hype, so that led to his conviction in for death penalty, which ideally I do not think was very appropriate. But as I said, to each their own. Now, so the next question is from Professor Savitri Dhanesha. Yes, Professor. Yes, Savitri, man, please tell me.
Uh,
Muskan, how long do cases last with circumstantial evidence? It really depends. I have seen cases where circumstantial evidence can go on as late as 10 years, and it can get over as early as 2 years. A normal case in the trial court in non-metro cities. By that I mean I'm not talking about Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad. Leaving these six cities, any case in a sessions court of circumstantial evidence usually takes between 5 to 7 years, depending on how fast or slow the case is going. But if it a case which has been highlighted by the media and there is certain pressure on the administration to act, then it can be convicted again. Then the person can be convicted even within 1 or 2 years, as we have seen in Nirbhaya and other cases. So it really depends upon the pressure on the prosecution and the diligence of the administration at that point in time. So that is the general, but the general time is between 2 to 10 years, depending on the particular circumstances and the administration at that point in time. Abhishek, it has relevance in the criminal justice system today because, as I said, without having some trust in a person's testimony, you cannot even call people to testify to certain facts. As I said, we can't run a society without having that trust. But I would say that it has eroded a lot. So we always look for corroborative evidence to any testimony. So a person's direct testimony is when the person is saying that, okay, I saw this person kill this particular deceased. So we will believe that person. But we would also like to corroborate this testimony of of this witness with other evidence. For example, ensuring that the location of the accused can be asserted that this person was in that same area. We can recover the weapon of offense. So we do trust the testimony, but the requirement for corroboration or more proof to substantiate this allegation has been raised in today's times. So the evidentiary requirement is a bit on the higher side than it was in those times. Ms. Savitri, there have been cases, as I have just mentioned, Dhananjay Chatterjee, and for that matter, Arushi Talwar, are cases on which conviction has been given on circumstantial evidence. The authenticity really depends on the evidence that you're talking about. For example, if you're talking about a witness's testimony with regard to the last seen theory, so if a person contends that, okay, I remember seeing X with Y the last time before. However, if it can be proved that X has a grudge against the accused and he is looking out for a way to grind some axe with this person, then this testimony will require corroboration. So that is one thing. And secondly, as I did mention earlier, that if the witness in this particular case is a relative of the deceased, then that is not sufficient by itself to discredit their testimony. You need to show the circumstance in which why is this related witness will be a biased witness. You have to show something. Merely saying that, okay, this person is related to the deceased and has some emotional investment in seeking this conviction is not sufficient to disregard that person's statement. So the authenticity given to each individual circumstantial evidence will depend on the weight of that evidence. So as I said, testimony has to be corroborated, other evidences have to be given there. For example, if you're saying that an accused is being convicted solely on the testimony of one person, so then the court will look for corroboration of that testimony. For example, as I said, cell phone location. There are other people who can confirm that you were there near the scene of crime, if not exactly at the scene of crime. Your clothes or other things that which are being talking about are found to have DNA evidence from the deceased, or anything that would, as I said, corroborate the testimony of the other evidences that you have. There are multiple evidences, and as I said, it depends upon facts and circumstances of each case. So there cannot be a general proposition out. And this is why I've given the factors that every evidence has to be corroborated. But sole person's testimony, I don't think so in a case of circumstantial evidence can be used, or it will be appropriate to be used to convict somebody. That is one. Of course, I'm not going to talk about cases where the media is pushing everyone. So that is definitely a different issue altogether. So the next question is from Krishan Kant Agrawal. Krishan Kant, in a case of confession evidence, the you please understand that Section 24 of the Indian Evidence Act and Section 25 of the Indian Evidence Act makes it amply clear that any confession given to a police officer cannot be accepted unless and until it has been corroborated or is given to a magistrate. The reason being that the judiciary is aware about the overzealous nature of the police forces to get a conviction. So they are very clear on this that unless and until confession is given before a magistrate and there are other evidences which can support this conviction, the mere fact that somebody has confessed to a crime cannot be used to convict them unless and until, as I said, there is a need for more evidence. And this is a rule of caution rather than a rule of direction that okay, it can never be done. But generally, that is what courts prefer. So courts can rely on certain parts of the confession statement to say that okay, a crime must have taken place, but they cannot convict and accuse saying that okay, this is the person that has done. So your confession statement can be used to say okay, bodies were recovered, okay, a weapon of offense was recovered, but nobody can say that okay, just because these things were recovered, you were guilty of that offense. So that is as far as that is concerned. The next question is from Vivek. Vivek, conviction can be recorded in cases of last seen theory only, specifically in cases of kidnapping. And I have certain judgments in this regard, which I'll be happy to share with you, which say that in cases of kidnapping, last seen theory is enough. Because please understand, kidnapping is not done with any bona fide intentions in mind. Nobody has ever kidnapped anybody with some good intentions, unless and until obviously they are looking to for bachelor's party or something as such. But on a less humorous note, no kidnapping has ever been done for something good. So if you are proved to have kidnapped somebody, in those circumstances, last seen theory is sufficient to convict you in a case of circumstantial evidence. The next question is from Abhishek. The circumstantial. Abhishek, in the Arushi Talwar case, there I would say there was a lot of smoke rather than evidence in the entire case. So it was very difficult to verify what was out there. And please understand something which very few people have, thought about. In this case, in the Arushi case, when the police was called, and I'm talking about the Noida police, they hardly took any evidence into account. They did not seal the scene of crime. They did not, take the testimony of the parents at the relevant time. And after the case, by the time the case was sent to the CBI, a lot of evidence had been compromised. So in this case, so the Arushi Talwar case. So in the Arushi Talwar case, by the time relevant evidence was even taken into account, everything had been wiped off. The scene of crime was wiped clean by the time CBI got into picture, and there was hardly any collection of evidence as far as the Noida police is concerned. So, as much as you would like to feel guilty for a poor 14-year-old girl getting killed. The reality is that you cannot convict somebody based on suspicion or emotion for that matter. See, please understand that as much as we feel guilty for a crime being committed, the guilt cannot be used as a weapon to convict somebody. So that is something that you have to take into account. In the Arushi case, and I can speak about the case with authority, Abhishek, because one of the seniors that I interned with, Mr. Mir, actually argued the matter in the Noida trial court as well as the Allahabad High Court. The judges were more interested in getting, I would say, some kind of, I would say, I think they were under a lot of social pressure, as I would like to call it, for convicting parents who have been portrayed as evil by the media than evidence that was out there. At the end of the day, let's not lose sight of the fact that there was no conclusive evidence to even suggest that the parents had have done this, and on the basis of which the Honorable High Court of Allahabad have exonerated them. So that is a huge thing that you should take into account. So I would say in that case, the evidences were not properly collected, and emotion was used more than anything else to convict the parents rather than evidence. I think that is where they failed more than anything else. Saishe has a question. Yes, Saishe, their corroboration is generally not expected in the case of circumstantial evidence in case of kidnapping. As I said, nobody has ever kidnapped anybody for any good intention. The idea of kidnapping is to engage in a crime. And as I said, don't take my word for it. I will send you relevant judgments of the Supreme Court which have convicted people based on the fact that kidnappers were the last person who were seen alive with the deceased in question. So I will send you judgments for the same, and we can, as I said, you can satisfy your curiosity based on them. So that is as far as that is concerned. Are there by any other questions?
There's just one question from Krishna Kant, just here.
Mhm.
Uh, if you would see.
Yes, Krishan Kant, yes, the court can take into account the income. Wait, just a second, I'm so sorry. No, Krishan Kant, that's not what the court can do. It's the opposite what the court can do. They can reject the inculpatory part and accept the exculpatory part. And that is what is determined by Section 27 of the Indian Evidence Act. If you read Section 27, I'll just read it out for your benefit. How much of information received from an accused may be proved. So if you read that particular section, I'll just, as I said, we'll just quickly go through it. Provided that when a fact is deposed as to discovered in consequence of information received from a person accused of any offense in the custody of a police officer, so much of such information, whether it amounts to confession or not, as relates distinctly to the fact thereby discovered, may be proved, which means that the only part where, as I said, recovery of the weapon of offense, recovery of other things that are out there can be taken into account, but the confession cannot be taken for the purposes of convicting an accused person. So that has to be taken into account. So that is as far as your question is concerned.